Recording in 3, 2, and 1. Welcome to episode 116 of Nerdery and Murdery.
Big 116. I'm Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week of the highs and lows, the ups and the downs, the good and the bad, the nerd and the murd. So, I finally, last weekend, sat down and watched Zack Snyder's Justice League.
The 4-hour cut.
The Snyder cut. And that was good.
Yes, it was.
Way better than the original. Way better than Joss Whedon's.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, I don't know. I thought it was so much better of a movie, and I really, really thoroughly enjoyed it.
That was a great movie.
Yeah.
Great film.
Yeah, that was great. Well worth the 4 hours of watching that. I'm glad I finally sat down to watch that. I was also going to say, I don't know, I realize we're in the future from what today is, so this is old news by the time this comes out, but I don't know if you've seen the news this morning.
What's that?
Israel has declared war on Hamas.
Oh, yeah. I was watching some of that yesterday.
Yeah.
Don't want to get too overtly political.
No.
There were operatives in the street indiscriminately shooting at cars full of women and children.
Yeah.
Yesterday.
Yeah, it's
television.
It's apparently pretty bad over there right now. And
yeah. And it caught them. They got caught with their pants down.
Yeah.
Just like the Yom Kippur War in '73.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the Valley of Tears.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is going to be bad.
This is going to be very, very bad for everybody involved.
Yeah.
They need to sit down and figure this out. Stop killing each other. Make it where these people can live and be happy on both sides of that wall.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily think the wall was a good idea. I understand. I also understand why they built it. Israel completely pulled out of Gaza,
mm-hmm.
gave it to the Palestinians, and then they
Mm-hmm.
started lobbing rockets at them. So they built this wall to keep them from lobbing rockets, which caused a whole bunch of other problems, which caused, Palestinians to radicalize, and it caused the Israelis to get more conservative, and it's just figure it out. You got to figure it out. Yeah. Ultimately, it's the British's fault from 1914.
Right.
But
hopefully this get figured out. And like I said, it's
Mm-hmm.
old news by the time this actually hits the air, but it's new news to me. I just saw it on the news this morning.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty bad. Yeah, they were rolling. Israel was rolling footage of. They were covered, but yeah, basically minivans with women and kids, sheets over them. Just they just opened fire on them with automatic weapons.
Ugh.
Yep.
The state of the world.
Yeah, getting crazier. But it's also right around the time of Halloween. This episode will air around Halloween.
Yeah, it is. So off the bad news there, and time to start for a little more. Well, I can't say light because I know what this episode's about, but let's go ahead and let you take over on the nerdery side of the house.
Why, thank you, sir. Today we're going to be talking about 3 films by Dario Argento.
Awesome. I know of one of them.
Dario Argento is an Italian film director, screenwriter, and producer. His influential work in the horror genre during the 1970s and 80s, particularly in the subgenre known as giallo, has led him to being referred to as the master of thrill and the master of horror. Let's talk about what giallo is. Giallo is a horror film, roughly. It is also a murder mystery. It is also a slasher movie, which is, like a genre of a horror film. There's generally a supernatural element, and it is generally colored like an art house film. It is lit, shot, and thought of as an art house film, and also a horror movie. And most of them that Dario Argento did are in English. Sometimes some of the characters will be speaking Italian and dubbed into English, but he hires English and American actors and just has them say their lines in English. and most of the Italians are speaking English as well. Um, Generally heavily accented, but yeah, this is kind of in his wheelhouse, and the dude kind of invented the genre. Um, there've been a lot of copies, a lot of people that I like, but Dario Argento made 3 movies that are they were commercially well received. They are pieces of art, and they are also good horror. Those 3 films are Suspiria, Inferno, and Tenebrae.
And Suspiria is the one that I was familiar with. I was not familiar with the others as the other two as well. And it's a trilogy, isn't it?
Well, okay, so originally the what they call the Three Mothers trilogy was Suspiria, Inferno, and the Mother of Tears. I didn't do the Mother of Tears because I like Tenebrae better. That's on me.
Hmm.
Um, because I like Tenebrae because of John Saxon more than anything else. He's great. I love the actor John Saxon. Um, he's right up there with Michael Ironside. If you can't get Michael Ironside, you get John Saxon. If you can't get John Saxon, you get Michael Ironside. He was the dad in the original Friday the 13th.
Oh, okay.
No, Nightmare on Elm Street. Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
John Saxon. And he was on TV and everything else. He made mostly B movies, but
Hmm.
um, he's really great in Tenebrae. He's really, really good. Everybody in that movie is good.
Hmm.
Um, but so he had an original trilogy, what they call the Animal Trilogy, which consisted of The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, The Cat of Nine Tails, and Four Flies uh, on Gray Velvet. These are good films. I'm not going to say anything against them. Good pieces of work. They're basically horror movies. The Three Mothers trilogy, again, consisting of Suspiria in 1977, Inferno in 1980, and The Mother of Tears in 2007. Plus, he has the standalone films Deep Red, Tenebrae, Phenomena, and Opera. Um, just incredible. He started out as a writer. One of his first big breaks was Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West in 1968. Um, and he was George Romero's script consultant on Dawn of the Dead. And he also composed the soundtrack with his longtime collaborators, Goblin, which is like an Italian weird rock band.
Hmm.
Um, Argento was born in Rome, the son of Sicilian film producer and executive Salvatore Argento and a Brazilian photographer, Elda Luxardo. He was of Italian ancestry as well as Brazilian. While still attending a Catholic secondary school as a teenager, Argento began work as a film critic, writing for magazines and columnist for the Rome-based newspaper Passacera. While working on, and I can't say it without going Passacera, so I'll apologize for that right now. Argento also began work as a screenwriter. His most notable works were for Sergio Leone, Bernardo Bertolucci, and his collaborator on the story for Sergio Leone's spaghetti western Once Upon a Time in the West. Argento began on his directorial debut, the Giallo film, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, in 1970, which was a major hit in Italy. It didn't really play very well over here. You could still see it. You could still pull it up. Argento returned to thrillers. He did some other non-horror movies, but he went back to thrillers. And he was inspired by John Carpenter's work on Halloween.
Hmm.
Because he saw Halloween and some other things in 1978, so he decided to do Suspiria. Suspiria was actually released in 77, but he got a chance to see Halloween in a rough cut before anybody else did. And it kind of sparked something. So he starts sitting down with his girlfriend and eventually wife at the same time, who is an actress, a writer, and in all 3 of these movies. Daria Nicolodi. Um, so Suspiria is how do I put it? I don't even know how to describe it. You've seen it. You've seen it many times. You own it on DVD.
No, I don't have it on DVD.
Oh, I thought you did. I'm
Uh-uh.
sorry.
No, 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 no. But I've seen it. It's it's hard to say this for a horror film, but it's true. Suspiria is beautiful
Oh my
in
goodness.
its color,
Yes.
and it's shocking in its color.
Yes.
That's the that's part of the appeal of it, is that it is so just you just need to see it to understand how much the color just pops in this movie, and his use of it throughout the whole movie. It's just visually beautiful.
It's a master class.
Yes.
Master class. And not only the color of the walls and the sets and the costuming, the color of the light that he uses is
Yes.
amazing. It's almost like their scenes are shot entirely through uh, uh, stained glass windows.
Right. Yes. No. Absolutely. Absolutely.
It, and again, you think it's horror, and his blood does not look like real blood.
Mm-mm.
It's red and it's opaque. Real blood does not look like that. When he goes to do a serious or a non-giallo movie, he uses real blood, because it's got red and it's got blue and it's got green in it, kind of a purple hue. And then when you put it on camera, it looks perfect. It looks like human blood.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't do that with Suspiria or Inferno or Tenebrae. When someone gets stabbed, it's bright red and opaque like paint.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stabbing.
Oh yeah.
Giallo or Gialli, if it's more than one movie. So we're talking about three Gialli films. Is Italian for yellow. It's a genre of murder mystery fiction and often contains slasher, thriller, psychological horror, sexploitation, and less frequently supernatural horror elements. So there's always a mystery because you're not really sure who the killer is or what their motivation is. It eventually all gets explained in the end.
Did you happen to see what was it, 2018 redo of it?
I have not.
I haven't either.
I'm trying to stay away from that movie. Not that I don't think they did a good job. I'm sure they did. They should have picked something else. You know what I mean?
It had a big star in it.
Yeah, you don't remake. Oh my God, it's like remaking Citizen Kane. You can make a movie about the story of how they wrote Citizen Kane, or a different story of Charles Foster Kane or something like that. You do not remake Citizen Kane because you don't need to.
It's got Tilda Swinton. That's who I was thinking of.
Swinton?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just watched Suspiria. I watched Suspiria last week, and I watched the others Friday night. I watched Tenebrae and Inferno Friday night. Not in order, just because Tenebrae came up first. But oh my God, they're so and Inferno. They're available right now. I want to say either on Freevee or Tubi.
I was just looking at that. I'll have that for you in just a second.
They're available right now. You can go, or they were available as of 2 days ago. Because I just watched them.
Suspiria is on Showtime, YouTube Primetime subscription, Hulu, Sling, Roku, Amazon Prime, Paramount. So, Tubi.
Yep. Yeah, all three of these movies you can go out and check out. I would urge you guys to stop what you're doing and go check out at least one of these films. if for nothing else, yes, there's a lot of nudity. It's Italian. Sorry, that's just the way it is. When they walk down the street, they see statues that are 1,000, 2,000, sometimes 3,000 years old that are completely nude, and it's okay with them. So there's a lot of nudity.
Inferno's on Tubi,
Mm-hmm.
and Tenabra is Plex, AMC Plus.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Because Joe Bob Briggs covered Tenebrae a couple of years ago.
Amazon Prime, Tubi. So yeah,
Yeah, you can go out and see all of them right now. I would
yeah.
caution you guys to go out and see all three of these movies right now. We'll pause for a second, come back.
Mm.
Okay, you're back. So Suspiria is this giallo, or gialli. It's a supernatural horror film directed by Dario Argento, who co-wrote the screenplay with Daria Nicolodi, who eventually became his wife. She is also in it. She is in all three of these films, and she helped co-write them. It's partially based on Thomas de Quincey's 1845 essay Suspiria de Profundis. The film stars Jessica Harper as an American ballet student who transfers to a prestigious dance academy, but realizes after a series of brutal murders that the academy is a front for a supernatural conspiracy. It also features Stefania Cassini, Flavio Bucci, Miguel Bosé, Alida Valli, Udo Kier. Love Udo Kier. And
Mm-hmm,
this is
mm-hmm.
probably the first thing I've ever seen him in. And John Bennett, as well as Daria Nicolodi. The film is the first in the trilogy, The Three Mothers, which also comprises Inferno and The Mother of Tears. And again, I did not include Mother of Tears because I still think Tenebrae was supposed to be the third one in this series, and they just kind of went in another direction while they were filming it. They film in these beautiful old buildings. These sets are full of cobwebs and old pieces of furniture and old pieces of outdated technology and just weird things. And then he will light them with these. In the background, there'll be a red light shining on a door. Off to stage right, there'll be, or stage left, there will be a light that's lit as blue. There'll be a very graphic color painting that's just blocks of color that's lit with white light, and then to the left there'll be a green or a purple light.
Mm-hmm.
In one scene. The whole movie is like this. And again, you've got a slasher film, you've got nudity, you've got sex, there's a mystery. What's going on? Who's doing who? What's happening? You've got scream queens, just the last girl, and sometimes the screams go on a little longer than they need to, but not much, just a little longer than they need to make it off-putting, because when you look at it from those lights and in those sets, it's a composition. It's what amazes me about, again, Dario Argento is he's basically he's like, oh, I'm gonna make a horror film. You know what? I'm gonna shoot it like I'm Federico Fellini, and he just does it. He and the Three Mothers actually take place in three different cities. Freiburg is where Suspiria takes place. Inferno takes place in New York and Rome, and I believe the last one, Mother of Tears, takes place in I think it's supposed to take place in Paris. But again, I picked Tenebrae, which takes place in New York and Rome as well.
Mm.
Oh my God, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. There's a scene at the very end where this woman walks through basically the backside of a mirror. Like you see her walking towards you. She walks through the mirror, and when she breaks the mirror, and when she steps through, she is a 10-foot Grim Reaper. And it's all done practically. In 1983, it sells it because they lit it that way. Yeah, she's walking toward. So the mirror, it's a full mirror here. She's walking from, say, where my head is in the video into the foreground. She steps in front of the mirror, breaks the mirror, walks through, and as soon as she steps through, she is a 10-foot Grim Reaper and screams, "I am death! Fear me!" Freaks everybody out. It's the climax of the film. Building's on fire. Everything's amazing. Amazing. Never seen anything like it in my life. Okay, I'm sorry. I got off track there. Let's talk about Suspiria. So she's this young ballet student. She goes to Freiburg in Baden-Württemberg in Germany. It's raining all the time. She goes to this dance school, and then people just start dying off. She's not let into the school the first night. She's forced to stay in town overnight. But she takes refuge in a friend's apartment, who tells her something sinister is happening at the school. Pat's ambushed by a shadowy figure who stabs her repeatedly and drags her to the roof of the apartment building before hanging her with a noose by throwing her through the building skylight. Pat's friend is also killed and being impaled by a falling giant shard. That's just basically how the movie ends. What's amazing about these giallo films, as I kind of relayed that down, is you change point of view with the character. You'll be following this character along. That's the character you think you're following, the last girl, as it were, the last guy, right? You start out following this one character. They get killed off or go someplace else, and you start following the action of another character, right? Until they get killed or go someplace else. And then another character crosses over, and that's who you're following. All three of these movies have that, which is why you have to have such a big and dynamic cast. I would say, as you said, and I'm sorry, I'm waxing poetic about this, but Suspiria is probably the most beautiful horror film you've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
To call it a horror film, and again, I don't see anything wrong with horror films. I think horror films are just as good as any other film. But to call it just a horror film is a disservice. I think to call it giallo is a disservice. It's something all its own. And the climactic scene is really kind of amazing.
It's funny too. In Suspiria, I don't know about the others. Of course, as I said, I haven't seen the others. But one of the things about Suspiria is, and it almost sounds like it would be bad, but it's not. It's the overpowering rock music.
Yes.
And it is. It's overpowering at times throughout the movie, but it's perfect in the movie.
Tangerine Dream did some of that.
Interesting. I like Tangerine Dream.
Yeah, Tangerine Dream did some of that with the band Goblin.
Yeah.
Basically a bunch of producers. But yeah, Tangerine Dream kind of had a hand in some of that.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Well, he liked them. He liked working with Goblin more, but Tangerine Dream just kind of helped Goblin out, as it were. But yeah, if you like Suspiria, I think you might actually like Inferno better.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. Inferno's, oh yeah. It's a 1980 Italian supernatural horror film, so 3 years after Suspiria, written and directed by Dario Argento and starring Irene Miracle, Lee McCloskey, Eleanor Giorgi, Daria Nicolati again, and Alida Valli also. The plot follows a young man's investigation into the disappearance of his sister, who had been living in New York, an apartment building that also served as home for a powerful, centuries-old witch. The cinematography was by Roman Albani, and Keith Emerson composed the film's musical score. Sorry, Keith Emerson. But there was also some Tangerine Dream stuff. It is a thematic sequel to Suspiria. The film is the second installment of The Three Mothers. Though it is the first of the trilogy to explore the idea of the three mothers. The long-delayed concluding entry, The Mother of Tears, was released in 2007. All three films are partially derived from Thomas de Quincey's Suspiria de Profundis, a collection of prose poetry in which he proposes the concept of the three ladies of sorrow. Mater Lacrimon, Mater Suspiriorum, and Mater Tenebrarum, concurrent with the three fates and graces in Greek mythology. Unlike Suspiria, Inferno received a very limited theatrical release, thus unable to match the box office success of its predecessor. While initially critical response was mostly negative, its reputation has improved considerably over the years. Kim Newman has called it perhaps the most underrated horror film of the 1980s.
Wow.
Yeah, Total Film named Inferno one of the 50 greatest horror films of all time. They actually ranked it higher than Suspiria. I don't know if I would go that far, but it's pretty damn good. And again, it's got that one scene I was talking about where you've got the nurse who you didn't realize was the bad guy for most of it. You think it's the old man she's working for, but it turns out she's the bad guy. She gets very little screen time. And he throws it. I say he, they throw it back and forth. You're like, oh, it's definitely that dude. Oh, it's definitely that lady. No, well, it can't be that lady because she just got killed. Can't be that dude. He just got killed. It can't be this person because the murderer is chasing them right now. So he's working. He's studying music in Rome. He gets a letter from his sister in New York saying she's having trouble. Some weird stuff starts to happen in Rome, and there's some murders surrounding this dude. He leaves Rome and goes to New York City, and the murders follow him. And they're all happening around this beautiful old building in this dank old neighborhood in New York City. Building is just lovely. It's just brick edifice, and it's gorgeous. But the whole neighborhood around it is just garbage. But it's the early 80s in New York City. They didn't have any money, you know? It's the time of 42nd Street in New York City. So it's that same sort of feeling that you get with Warriors. Because they're filming in the same streets. About the same time, you know, maybe a year or two apart, but pretty much the same time and place. And again, as he explores this old building, he'll run into a room where everything's covered in cobwebs, just like in Suspiria, where it's lit with all those different lights, like they're shining through a stained glass window. You know, because you got red over here, and you got blue over here, and purple over here. It's amazing. And then you think, okay, you think that the thing is taking him out. It hasn't. He'll get like passed out or something. And then it'll go on to another character, and you'll follow that character around thinking, okay, this must be the final girl. It is not. That character also gets killed. You think the same thing about the person who turns up to be the ancient witch, the nurse. You kind of follow her around thinking she's the good guy. Throwing ruses. These people who are constantly watching them, you think they're the bad people. They're not. When you finally see it at the end, you know who it has to be because everybody else has been killed. You know, oh, well, it has to be the nurse. You know, there's nobody else it could be. And then she starts talking, and he's like, okay. And then you think, okay, she's an acolyte of this ancient witch. No, she is this ancient witch who is also death. And the building's on fire, and that scene I was talking about with the mirror. Right. Oh my God, it is so good. And again, it's all in English. You don't have to watch it in subtitles. Some of the accents are a little rough. There's less nudity in overt nudity in Inferno than there is in Tenebrae or Suspiria. Tenebrae got over here got It wasn't NC-17. I actually got an X rating over here because of the graphic nature of some of the murders, the kills,
Hmm.
and the overt nudity. Um, but yeah, Inferno is the sequel to Suspiria, and it was planned to be the sequel to Suspiria. Tenebrae was supposed to be the sequel to Suspiria, then Inferno, because you're talking about the lady Tenebra. But they decided while they were filming, nah, we'll do that later. We'll just call it Tenebrae and it'll be fine. But it still feels that way.
Hmm.
There's no supernatural stuff going on in Tenebrae. It's just murders. But yeah, with Inferno, you get again the same lovely shots, just like you had in Suspiria. But it didn't get a wide release in America. It was huge in Italy, but you really get that Suspiria feel to it. And again, I just watched this bad boy yesterday, and it holds up. It's still beautifully shot. I like it a little bit better than Suspiria, but only marginally. And that may just be because I saw it more recently than I did Suspiria. Because I watched Suspiria last week.
Hmm.
I wanted to bone up on these because it's been a long time since I've seen some of them. Tenebrae, I saw it back in the 80s, and I hadn't seen it since, and I watched it yesterday. Tenebrae is Darkness. It's a 1982 Italian giallo film, written and directed by Dario Argento, and the film stars Anthony Franciosa, an American author, as American author Peter Neal, who, while in Rome promoting the latest murder mystery novel, becomes embroiled in a search for a serial killer who may have been inspired to kill by his novels. You get, again, John Saxon and Daria Nicolodi co-star as Neal's agent and assistant, respectively, while Giano Gemma and Carlo Stagnaro appear as detectives investigating the murder. John Steiner, Veronica Lario, and Mirella D'Angelo also feature in minor roles. The film has been described as exploring things of dualism and sexual aberration and has strong metafictional elements. Some commentators consider Tenebrae to be a direct reaction by Argento to criticisms of his previous work, most especially his depictions of murder of women. After Argento had experimented with pure supernatural horror with 77 Suspiria and 1980's Inferno, Tenebrae represented the filmmaker's return to the giallo subgenre. I disagree. I think Suspiria and Inferno were giallo because there was a mystery going on. Argento was inspired by a series of incidents which saw an obsessive fan telephone the director to criticize him for the damaging psychological effects of his previous work. The telephone calls culminated in death threats towards Argento, who channeled the experiences into the writing of Tenebrae.
Wow.
Yeah, the director also wanted to explore the senselessness of killings he had seen and heard about while staying in LA in 1980, to promote Suspiria and some of the other stuff and to get some money. Shot on location in Rome at Elio Studios, Tenebrae utilizes mostly modern-looking locations and sets, allowing Argento to realize his vision that the film reflects a near future with diminished populations. The director filmed none of the historical landmarks that usually feature in film sets set in Rome, employing director of photography Luciano Tavalli. Argento also intended that the film simulate the stark, realistic lighting featured in television police shows at the time. And it feels like a television police show. It's very hard-boiled, almost like an episode of Hawaii Five-O. It's got that feel to it, but it's still a giallo film. There are these two. There's a scene where it picks up in this restaurant with these two bisexual women who are looking to bring a man home. One of them does, and the other one's like, I don't want to deal with that dude. So they're talking about stuff, and at one point you think one of them may be the killer. and then the killer shows up and kills them with, again, with that bright red blood, that opaque paint. I think it was that scene why this got, at the time, an X rating, and they just went for a, don't give us a rating, we'll just go unrated.
Right.
So there are very few theaters that actually ever showed it. Some grindhouses, some drive-ins, because it was 1983. People were a little looser with what they would show, in theaters. But where this movie really, really lived, video. It was one of those movies. Can I borrow the podback machine for just a second?
Sure.
Okay. I am 12, 13. We had just gotten a VCR in my house. And my old man had always taken me to the movies, and he knew how much I loved movies. And I'd go to see them. And I'll go to this video store, and I wouldn't go for the new releases because I figured I'd watch them eventually anyway. I would go to like the science fiction section. Well, I got through all the science fiction section, and I noticed the art house section. It was the same video store that John Johnson's wife worked in back in the day.
Oh, Take It Home?
Take It Home. That was it. I had to ask him the other day when I was writing up the notes, and I forgot to put it in. I hit him up like, what was the name of the video store you worked in? He's like, I didn't. My wife did.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I thought you did too. He's like, no, it was
No.
Take It Home. He's like, and it was awesome. I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, Take It Home was great.
Take It Home was one of the first local video store chains that Blockbuster bought out. Do you know that?
Yeah.
Yep. It was one of the, and it was incredible because they had this, they said it was like independent/foreign film section, and it was this wall, right? So I finished up all the science fiction films. Besides, the old man would let me get 2 of them because they were cheaper, right? So I finished up the science fiction wall, and right next to it is this independent/foreign film. And there was a science fiction film in the corner, so I picked it up. I don't even remember what it was. And then I started at the top of that and started making my way over. This is where I discovered Tenebrae, Mephisto, some other great films. This would have been about 1985, 1986. And I basically made it through that entire wall.
Wow.
Yeah, I made it through that entire wall. That's where I got my love of weird movies, as everybody called them when I was a kid. But I loved them, and I go home and watch them. And my family wasn't really worried about the nudity or the violence and stuff, because I was a pretty level-headed kid. I wasn't wild then. It was more about the study of it, and they understood that. So plus they were my grandparents, and they got tired of keeping up with that stuff with the kids before them. No, he's not going out wrecking cars. This kid's fine. Let him watch the little goofy movie. So yeah, and this was one of those movies. And I watched it, and I didn't even realize it was a horror movie when I watched it. Because I would watch it during the day. It was just a murder mystery, and really good too. But yeah, that scene with the 2 bisexual women was pretty graphic, let's say. And again, like you said before, the rock music that was a little too loud. Yeah, one of them puts a record on after the dude had left. And he's one of the people you think is the murderer too. It's not. After that dude had left, she puts on a record. She's like, I feel sick. I drank too much, blah, blah, blah. He's like, well, why did you go home with that dude anyway? They're having an argument. Killer breaks in, starts killing him. Again, that bright red blood. Goes upstairs, kills the other girl. Leaves, and then, of course, they discover it, and they start talking to this writer, because it's like, they know he didn't do it because they can account for his whereabouts. I think he was actually working with the police on another investigation while this was happening. So they know it's not him, right? You clear this dude out early on in the investigation, or in the early part of the film. Plus, he's getting death threats himself. You come to find out later on, one of the people who you think is the killer, because he's in the same house that some stuff happened in, he gets killed with an axe, and it's like, what? How can he's the killer? How can that happen? You find out toward the end of the movie, and I want to say, spoilers here. Watch it anyway.
Too late.
40 years ago. 40 years ago. 1983. He was the killer. He was the killer. But the writer finds out that his wife and his publicist are having an affair, so he decides to kill the killer and make out like he is the killer to get rid of his wife and his agent.
Interesting.
You don't find that out until the last 5 minutes of the movie. That they actually took the serial killer, got taken out 20 minutes before.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't know that. So yeah, and again, you've got John Saxon, you've got all these great Italian people. There's a couple of British actors too, British character actors in it. Really, really great people. The coroner, British actor, he's really, really great. Can't remember his name, I'm sorry. But he's a character actor, and you've seen him in a lot of stuff. He was great in it. Everybody in this movie is great. Again, you get the same shots. The house of the literary critic, who was actually the killer, when you look at the house, because I was watching it and the kids came through and was like, oh my God, look at that place. I was like, yes, that is the epitome of 80s excess. The house that they're in is the epitome of 80s excess. It looks like a set from Miami Vice. You know, from one of the drug dealers' houses.
Mm-hmm.
Just like that. And it's like, oh my God, that's amazing. And of course, it's in Italy, so everybody's dressed to the nines, and it's well shot, it's well edited. You get a lot more outside scenes with this movie, whereas you really don't get any in Suspiria. Or you get a couple, but for the most part, they're inside getting shot through that tinted light.
Mm-hmm.
You get a couple in Inferno. Yeah. With this, you get a whole bunch of those. It is also very, very long. Tenebre's like 2.5, 3 hours. It's a long movie. There's a lot of murder going on and a lot of really loud rock music, and it is just incredible. I don't like it as much as I do Inferno. And I like Inferno a skosh better than I do Suspiria, but that's not to say Tenebre is not a great movie. And I think if they hadn't have given it that bad rating, this probably would have been his most well-known movie.
Mm-hmm.
And he had more of a career other than this stuff, but I really wanted to talk about this stuff because I think these three films are masterpieces.
Well, just as an FYI, because I was looking at this earlier as well. Let me find it.
Oh, thank you.
Suspiria on Rotten Tomatoes got a 94%. Inferno. I gotta find it. Hold on, please. Uh-oh. It's way down here. 1980, is that right?
Yep, 1980, Inferno.
Inferno got a 63%.
What?
And Tenebrae.
Yeah, Tenebrae.
Yeah, I got it. Got an 81%.
Okay. So Rotten Tomatoes prefers Suspiria, Tenebrae, and
most people do. I mean, if you look up best horror movies of all time, Suspiria will be in the top 10 of most lists.
Yeah. And in a lot of cases, number one or number two.
I've seen it number one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like Night of the Living Dead, Suspiria.
Here, let's experiment. I'm just going to pull up the very first site. Let's see. Best horror movies of all time. And let's see. The very first one is Rotten Tomatoes. And I'm just going to scroll down because it gave the top 200.
Yeah, we just want to know the top 10.
Well, it's not in the top 10 on Rotten Tomatoes. Well, it's not even in the top 20. I'm not sure
That's
how.
flawed. That is
Yeah,
flawed.
I think that's very flawed.
Yeah, well, unless they're counting giallo as a separate genre, but
I'm down into the 50s and it's not even on there. So screw that.
okay.
Screw that list.
Fools.
Here,
Fools.
here, I'm going to Collider. 25 best of all time. And da 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 da.
Do 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 do.
Yeah, I knew Rosemary's Baby would be in there. That's quite often in there. That's pretty
It's
horrifying.
all right.
Well, my experiment is not working. It wasn't even in that list.
I think these people
Weird.
are wrong. They're wrong. They're so wrong.
I know I've seen lists where it's in the top 10.
Suspiria, the best horror movie of all time. Yeah, okay, I'll give you that.
I mean,
like Inferno better, but that's just me.
That's how I found out about Suspiria as one of these top 10 lists once. I don't know. My experiment failed miserably. So there you go. There you go.
Yeah, it's people on the internet are dumb.
Huh.
Except for our listeners.
Right.
Except for our listeners. They're awesome.
Right.
But yeah, that's about it for these three films, other than you have to get out and see them. They are, if for nothing else, watch it for the beauty. You can even turn the sound off and watch them. They'll play like a silent film. They're that pretty.
Yeah. And I can say without a doubt Suspiria for sure. I mean, definitely watch it because I've seen that and it is visually stunning.
It's stunning.
Yeah.
Stunning. From the costuming to the set to the foreground, the background. They thought about everything. The way they did it, the way they shot it. It's beautiful.
Yep.
And he didn't have big budgets for these. I mean, he had decent budgets, and these were like summer movies for the Italians, But he decided, screw it. We're gonna make a summer movie. We might as well make a piece of art while we're at it, and that's what he did. Right. He and his wife.
Awesome, great job. Appreciate that.
Thanks,
appreciate that. With that, we'll step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
All right, so for today, I got my information off Unresolved, Wikipedia, and all that's interesting, and this is the story of Mr. Cruel.
Mr. Cruel.
Yes. So Mr. Cruel is the name given to the Australian boogeyman who became well known for the heinous assaults against children he would commit in the late 1980s and early 1990s. His identity has never been discovered, and he's escaped justice for almost 30 years. His 3 confirmed attacks and the suspected murder remains unsolved cold cases, and there's currently a reward of 200,000 Australian dollars for the 2 abductions. In April of 2016, Victoria Police increased the reward for information that leads to the perpetrator's arrest and conviction from Australian 100,000 to Australian $1 million. So on August 22nd, 1987, on the outskirts of Melbourne, specifically in the suburban area of Lower Plenty, things are as they should be. While the rest of the world is beginning to cool down for the fall, winter is coming to an end in Australia, so temperatures are relatively chilly in the southern city. It's around 4 a.m. on a Saturday, time when most families are home fast asleep, but on this chosen morning, an urban legend was beginning to take form in the shape of a masked man lurking outside of a family home. Removing a pane from the family's living room window, the criminal has made his way inside, alerting absolutely no one. The masked man made his way to the bedroom of the parents, armed with a knife and a gun, and he woke the 2 parents under threat of lethal retaliation, pretending to just be a common thief that was interested in their personal belongings. Commanding the parents to roll over onto their stomachs, the criminal tied both their hands and feet together, nullifying any plan of escape the two may have had in their in their groggy, alarmed state. The intruder utilized a type of knot commonly known used by sailors or those with nautical experience. And to further compound their inability to escape, the masked man ordered them into their nearby wardrobe, but not before blindfolding and gagging each with surgical tape that he had brought with him. He locked both parents in under the threat of death and made his way to the rest of the house. And in an adjacent bedroom, the family's 6-year-old son was awoken by the intruder, but kept relatively unharmed. The masked man blindfolded and gagged the boy with the same surgical tape and then tied him to his own bed. And this is when the intruder made his true purpose known, and he made his way into the nearby bedroom of the family's 11-year-old daughter. Over the next 2 hours, the masked intruder would take breaks from his own perverted sexual desires to wander through the family's home, even stopping at one point to make himself a meal. After spending the better part of 2 hours sexually assaulting the 11-year-old girl, the mysterious psychopath left the house with a box of classic records and a blue jacket stolen from the family. And this is how the legend of Mr. Cruel began, and an established Australian boogeyman that would haunt parents and children for decades afterwards.
A blue jacket and a box of records.
Mm-hmm.
You just saw those and said, I want those.
Mm-hmm. Following the attack on the family in Lower Plenty, the police were obviously called and brought to investigate the crime, but they were stumped. The attack seemed to come unprovoked, and the family had no real demons to look further into, and the crime didn't seem to fit with any other open cases in the area. In the late 1980s, Melbourne had a reputation of being a safe place. It was, quote, the most livable city in the world, that many citizens described as its official slogan. And while violent crime still happens within its borders, it is at a lower rate than many other places in the world. So police began to look into the assault and pick apart the pieces. Again, the parents had been bound, gagged, and locked in their own wardrobe, and the son had been bound, gagged, and blindfolded and tied to his bed. And then the suspect, after physically assaulting the daughter, searched the house and made off with the record collection and the coat, which is all very weird.
Mm-hmm.
More details came out when the investigators began to focus on the daughter, and she told the police that during one of the perpetrator's breaks, he had used the family phone to call someone else. She said that this call seemed like a threat, as apparently the man had demanded the person on the other end of the phone to move their children, or else they would be next, and he referred to this person as Bozo. The police did check the family records, and they were surprised to see that no such call had actually taken place. Obviously, this was before the common nature of cell phones, but it became clear later on that this was a trend of Mr. Cruel. He liked to plant red herrings like this to confuse investigators.
Pick up the phone, pretending like he's calling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it would be over a year before the perpetrator struck again. Unfortunately, we would see the stakes rise dramatically as the individual began a reign of terror that would leave parents and children living in fear. On December 27th, 1988, just after Christmas, when most families would still be enjoying the post-holiday bliss, one family experienced the most traumatic haunting experience of their lives. John Wills, his wife and his 4 daughters were sleeping in their Ringwood area home just a few miles southeast of where the previous assault had taken place over a year prior. John was deep asleep when around 5:45 in the morning, the sensation of an object to his temple startled him awake. A voice ordered him, quote, "Don't be a hero," and John was immediately plunged into a parent's worst nightmare. The masked intruder, wearing dark blue overalls and a blue ski mask, was holding a gun to his head. To John's head, that is.
Mm-hmm.
He was holding a knife in his other hand, and John knew that to fight back would be to risk the lives of his entire family. John and his wife were both ordered to roll into their stomachs, much like the first crime, and they were bound at their wrists and ankles with copper wire. A similar type knot was utilized as before, the one that said was generally used by sailors. And they were blindfolded and gagged with the same type of surgical tape as before. And then they were assured by the intruder that he was only there for money. The man stole roughly $35 from the family's bedside table, and then he went throughout the house, physically cutting the home's phone lines. After assuring he had had a head start, he made his way into the bedroom that the family's 4 daughters shared. Addressing 10-year-old Sharon Wills by name, this man woke up the 10-year-old and then proceeded to blindfold and gagged her as he had her parents. He stopped and picked up a few items of her clothing and then made off with her into the early morning. And it took roughly 15 minutes for the two parents to break free of the restraints. And when they finally did, they were confronted with the crippling realization that their oldest daughter was missing. As I'd said, the phone lines were cut, so John had to rush next door to the neighbor's house to use their telephone, and he then proceeded to search the neighborhood in a panicked state. Unfortunately, his search would be in vain and came up with nothing. Sharon was gone, and the family's nightmare had just begun. For over 18 hours, the Wills family existed in a panic state, worried that their 10-year-old daughter had been taken from them for good. And it was just after midnight when a woman stumbled upon a small figure standing on a street corner. Wrapped up in green garbage bags, the small figure was Sharon Wills, as she had been left by her abductor. And despite the terrible trauma that had just befallen her, the 10-year-old was in surprisingly strong spirits, calm and collected. She told the woman, quote, "My name is Sharon Wills, and I was taken from home early this morning. A man left me here and told me to go and ring home." The woman that found her called police and got in touch with the Wills family, and soon they were all reunited, but the investigation into the assault was just beginning, and it turned up some surprising evidence, or really lack of any. Sharon was blindfolded throughout the entire ordeal, so she wasn't able to give a physical description of the attacker, but she described him as soft-spoken, rather blunt individual that actually seemed somewhat caring about his victims. This, of course, stood in stark contrast to the egregious crimes that had just taken place, so investigators were sure to take note of it. One of the words used to describe him was gentle, which was especially shocking. And during her brief captivity, Sharon was apparently fed a Vegemite sandwich and given some milk and lemonade to drink.
Oh, God, that's torture in itself.
Yeah.
Vegemite's awful. Oh, sorry for our Australian listeners. Yeah.
Because I think we have. I think
peanut butter does not hit the American palate properly.
I think we have some Australian listeners.
That's, again, very sorry, but I've tried your Vegemite. It's not good.
I've never tried it, so don't know. Shortly before being
licking a dirty ashtray.
Shortly before being let go, the suspect given the 10-year-old a thorough cleaning, not only washing off any possible forensics evidence he had left behind, but clipping her fingernails and toenails, brushing and flossing her teeth, and even more. The abductor either kept or discarded her clothes, not wanting any forensics evidence to be traced back to him. He then dressed her in an assortment of garbage bags before dumping her off on the grounds at Baywater High School, just a few miles from her house. Investigators were quick to piece the incident to the prior one in Lower Plenty, but they wouldn't make details of that public for quite some time. Needless to say, though, an environment of fear was beginning to take shape, and the nickname of the Hampton Rapist began to be used to describe this burgeoning boogeyman. In the weeks and months following the assault, the Wills family lived in a state of fear. The parents, along with their 4 daughters, began to sleep in the family's lounge together, refusing to sleep in separate bedrooms for months. They installed a security system and were given a golden retriever as a pet by a caring individual. And John Wills, in particular, took the assault very difficultly. He began to wonder if anything he might have done would have changed the course of the assault or saved his daughter all that untold pain. And he had no way to know that he had simply had to hedge his bets, police eventually finding his daughter's abductor. Unfortunately, the investigation into finding the perpetrator was a dead end. Very little evidence was left behind or ever found, and none of it could be used to find one specific person. One piece of evidence was emerged in later interviews in which Sharon told of hearing low-flying aircraft during her short captivity, and this is a clue that would go on to affect the investigation later on. While many in the area began to wonder who this masked menace was, another frightening question began to emerge: who was next? But nearly 2 years would pass before that question could be answered.
And he knew her name.
He did, because he called her by name.
Yeah, he knew her name. Okay.
The area of Canterbury, Victoria, which lies just on the outskirts of Melbourne, located west of Ringwood and south of Lower Plenty. It's yet another part of the suburban sprawling area, albeit much closer to the center of Melbourne proper. The Linus family were rather well-off English citizens who had been renting a house along with the esteemed prestigious Monomeath Avenue. For context, this neighborhood had been the home to many Australian politicians and public officials. Moving to Australia for business purposes, the family was preparing to move back to England in the very near future. In fact, they had moved to this Melbourne area community specifically to raise their children safely and were planning on making their move back home just days later. On July 3rd, 1990, however, their illusion of safety would be shattered forever. The Linus parents, Brian and Rosemary, were at a farewell party being thrown for them. The family was planning again to move back to England, so they had left their two daughters at home alone for just a few hours. It was shortly before midnight when 15-year-old Fiona and 13-year-old Nicola were awoken by the angry, commanding barks of a masked intruder. He ordered Nicola into another room to collect her school uniform from the Presbyterian Ladies' College she attended, while he began to tie up Fiona in the very bed that she had been sleeping in. Armed with a gun and a knife, the two teenage girls stood no chance of either fight or flight. And now with the oldest of the two bound, the intruder was able to make his getaway quite easily. Informing Fiona that her father, Brian, would have to pay $25,000 for the safe return of Nicola, the abductor took her and made his escape in the family's own rental car, which was parked in the driveway. The two drove for about a kilometer, and then they proceeded to park the family's rental car and presumably transfer to another parked car that this abductor had prepared. It was just 20 minutes after the abduction that Brian and Rosemary returned home, finding their driveway empty and their front door open. Their intrigue turned into fear, which only was compounded when they found 15-year-old Fiona bound to her own bed with a ransom message to share. The police again found almost no evidence from the crime scene itself, the intruder's kidnapping of Nicola having been done in a quick, tactical manner. They realized the tough spot that they were now put in, with most missing person cases going cold just after hours after the initial abduction. Unlike the abduction of Sharon Wills, Nicola wasn't returned later that day or even the next day. Roughly 36 hours after the abduction, her father Brian held a press conference in which he pleaded with the abductor and stated his willingness to comply with the ransom demands in any way possible. Unfortunately, the Hampton rapist, which he was now known as, had left behind only a demand for money, but no means of which to collect.
It was another red herring.
Mm-hmm. The investigation began to look into business dealings of Brian's, beginning to think that this may somehow be related to his work. The police believed at the time that this ransom must have been personal in nature. Fortunately for poor Nicola and her family, she was found alive approximately 50 hours after being abducted, and it was her 14th birthday.
Oh my God.
Found outside an electricity station in Kew, just a short distance away from her home, Nicola was left by her abductor. Fully dressed and wrapped in a blanket, her abductor had left her outside the utility station and had told her to sit in a prone position until he could drive away. After that, she had removed the blindfold that had become her vision for the entirety of her captivity and made her way to a nearby home. It was shortly after 2 a.m, but she immediately phoned her father, who had been awake praying for a safe return since returning to a desecrated house on July 3rd. Nicola was able to provide the investigators some details that were vital to their investigation. Most prominent among them was a rough estimation of the perpetrator's height, which was roughly 5'8". She had guessed this by judging her own height to the attacker when he rushed her from her bedroom to the getaway car, and that he barely stood taller than herself. She revealed information that the suspect likely had reddish-brown hair, and Nicola was also able to give detectives some vital details that they hadn't heard of yet, a description of her abductor's house and vehicle. While the sketches she gave police were rather mundane and plain in nature, they were of vital importance, especially once word of how she had gotten them got out. Apparently, Nicola had been blindfolded for the duration of her captivity, but had been given a few chances to get a glimpse, and she'd taken it. This went in direct contrast to the threats given to her by Mr. Cruel, and he told her, quote, "My freedom is worth more than your life." Just like Sharon Will's captivity, Nicola had been bathed and cleaned before her release. Throughout her captivity, she had also been forced into a neck brace fastened to the abductor's bed, which no doubt fed into the fear of panic she must have felt. During this endeavor, it was reported that the perpetrator talked aloud to another person while Nicola was blindfolded in a bedroom, but no response was ever heard. Investigators weren't sure whether this meant there was an accomplice or such, but it's likely that this was just one of his many red herrings. She also told investigators months after the Linus family completed their move back home to their native England that she remembered hearing the same type of low-flying aircraft previously reported by Sharon. To investigators, this meant the suspect most likely lived in the surrounding vicinity of the nearby Tula Marine Airport, most likely in its direct flight path. So now investigators had a rough height of the suspect as well as detailed sketches of his house, the interior of his car, and a good idea of where he lived. You would have assumed that a warrant would have been issued for an arrest any day now with that kind of information, but unfortunately, the worst was yet to come.
What? Okay, they knew. Okay, granted, it's probably a big neighborhood, but they definitely knew the neighborhood. They had a rough guesstimation of what the house looked like. The interior of the car, they knew the height of the guy, and maybe he had reddish, blondish hair.
Yep, but they had nothing else.
Okay.
They had nobody to fit the description.
I wonder if they've got the wrong airport.
I don't know.
Or is the sound of the low flying plane something he's playing over a speaker?
That's always possible too.
All right, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
No, I don't know. Good points. Good questions. So John and Phyllis Chan were two incredibly hardworking parents that worked approximately 18 hours a day to ensure luxurious lives for their three daughters. Both were immigrants to Australia, and the two parents owned 3 restaurants in the Eltham area of Victoria, as well as a handful of other property investments. The two parents often didn't return home until midnight or so, managing one of their 3 restaurants, and they would often leave their 3 daughters home alone, trusting their 13-year-old daughter, Carmen, or maybe Carmine, to watch over the other 2. Mr. Cruel must have known this, as detectives believes he would stake out his victims for weeks or months ahead of time, learning their habits. On July 13th, 1991, terror and tragedy would strike the Chan family in the form of Mr. Cruel himself.
This is about a year after the last one.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'm with you.
And there was a 2-year gap at one point between them as well. So he may have spent all that time casing him out, yeah. Even though the family resided in the comfortable Templestowe district of Victoria in a house that many would classify as a mansion, they weren't immune to the dread of Mr. Cruel. And it was a Saturday, normally a very busy day for the Chan parents. Carmine and her 2 younger sisters were left to their own devices, which meant the 3 sisters would be watching TV in Carmine's room. At roughly 8:40 in the evening, Carmine and one of her sisters started to go to the family's kitchen to make something to eat when they were confronted by Mr. Cruel wearing his traditional ski mask along with a gray-green tracksuit and holding an intimidating knife. He told the 3 girls, "I only want your money," and then he forced them into Carmine's closet. He claimed he only wanted Carmine to show him where the money was, and he braced a bed in front of the closet, locking the 2 youngest sisters in as he made his getaway with Carmine. It's spelled Karmien.
Yeah, Carmine.
Yeah, one of those. I'm not sure.
We'll call her Carmine.
Within minutes, the 2 youngest sisters had broken free from their prison and immediately placed a call to their father, who was at the family's restaurant. By the time the police arrived, they knew what had taken place. The large house had no signs of children within, no yard toys, no playground equipment, or anything of the sort. This attack had been planned, and that was evidence from the house's driveway. Written in big, bold letters on Phyllis Chan's parked Toyota Camry were the words, quote, "Payback, Asian drug dealer, more to come." Tracing his entrance from a cut window screen, police were able to track the intruder's step through the house, including his getaway through the sliding glass door in the kitchen. Excuse me. Aided by tracking dogs, they were able to trace the abductor's steps to the family's garden and tennis court, up to nearly 300 meters away at a vacant lot, where he must have made his getaway with Carmine at a waiting car. Hoping to get their daughter returned home safely to them, both John and Phyllis Chan held a press conference roughly 72 hours later. Phyllis Chan broke down sobbing, holding up the outfit Carmine had been wearing the night she had been taken and pleading for her daughter to be returned home safely. Days later, the Chan family posted an encrypted letter in the local newspaper using a cipher that Carmine would have been able to decipher. They offered a ransom in exchange for the safe return of their daughter, and even Carmine's sisters penned letters to be published to the media begging for their older sister to be returned to help take care of them and help them with their homework. Unfortunately, though, days, weeks, and then months would pass with no word on Carmine's safe return. The first police responders badly spoiled any potential identification by failing to establish the Chan house as a crime scene. There were dozens of police walking through the house and looking for leads before investigators could look for clues of their own. And even though the police force spent the next few months running a fine-tooth comb through John Chan's personal and professional life, looking for any possibility of criminal ties or business enemies, the investigation soon swung focus on Mr. Cruel. The writing on Chan's vehicle was nothing more than a red herring, meaning solely to mislead investigators once again. This became one of the largest manhunts in Australian history, and Operation Spectrum was a multi-million-dollar undertaking that consumed tens of thousands of man-hours along with many thousands of more volunteer hours. Offering an Australian $300,000 reward for any information leading to the capture of Mr. Cruel, the safe return of Carmine Chan was of utmost priority. Unfortunately, however, there would not be a happy ending for Carmine or her family. Nearly a year to the day of Carmine's abduction, on April 9th, 1992, a man was walking his dog in a nearby area of Thomastown along Edgar's Creek when the pair stumbled upon a weird object. He bent down to touch it and was horrified by his discovery. Returning home to alert the authorities, the police soon discovered what the man had found, a fully decomposed skeleton, which would soon be revealed to have been Carmine Chan. An autopsy would reveal that Carmine had been shot 3 times in the head, execution style, and based on the decomposition of her skeleton, had likely been dead for close to a year.
She saw his face.
Probably. Theories have lingered as to why Mr. Cruel murdered Carmine, but that can possibly be explained by Carmine's own mother, Phyllis. Phyllis insists that Carmine was a stubborn girl who would have fought against her victimized and most likely learned her abductor's identity, as you guessed. It's possible she learned who her kidnapper was and paid the ultimate price for it. And even though his life had been torn apart, John Chan was cleared of any possible wrongdoing and revealed to be an upstanding member of society. Operation Spectrum now publicly connected Carmine Chan's murder to the 3 previous sexual assault kidnappings and laid the blame at the feet of the true culprit, still unidentified Mr. Cruel. Operation Spectrum would last for the next few years, costing over $4 million. The 40-member task force would go on to investigate over 27,000 suspects, receive over 10,000 tips from the public, and search over 30,000 houses in the hopes of identifying a single clue. And while Mr. Cruel was never identified by the task force, it went on to arrest over 70 people involved in child pornography, which was a seedy underworld that many believed Mr. Cruel to be involved in. Both of his freed abductees had claimed to have seen or heard clues of a camera at the foot of the bed they had been detained in, and it's an easy step to believe that Mr. Cruel was involved in the trading of child porn. Mr. Cruel is believed to have videotaped or perhaps taken still photographs of his attacks, and detectives believe that if he is still alive, he will have kept the tapes and or photos and will still collect and possibly swap child pornography. They say he almost certainly continues to collect pornography through the internet and may communicate with children through chat lines. But unfortunately, despite all the good accomplished by Operation Spectrum, the Victoria Police Force was marred with the claims of corruption in the early 90s, which not only would go on to affect later investigations into Mr. Cruel, but bring forward many claims of a cover-up. Operation Spectrum was eventually shelved in 1994 with it any potential leads for Mr. Cruel. Over the years, theories would linger about the identity of Mr. Cruel and his eventual fate. No future crimes would be attributed to him, but investigators have possibly tagged prior crimes on Mr. Cruel. While they believe the abduction and murder of Carmine Chan was his last offense in the Victoria area, there are potentially up to a dozen assaults on children in the mid-1980s that have remained unsolved, and almost all of them share a couple of details with the Mr. Cruel abductions. So it's possible that Mr. Cruel is far more notorious of a criminal than publicly known, but police have refused to release details of these prior assaults or Mr. Cruel's alleged ties to them. Another theory has emerged that has been Mr. Cruel's supposed ties to the Victoria school system. All four of the assaults and abductions happened during school breaks, which lead many to believe that Mr. Cruel was an employee of the local school system. This also goes in conjecture with the knowledge that both Nicola Linus and Carmine Chan attended the same school, Presbyterian Ladies College, and Mr. Cruel requested Nicola to bring her school uniform along with her. This would bring into question his ties to Sharon Wills, since he addressed her by name on the night she was abducted. Further interviews with his two living abductees revealed that he liked to refer to them as Missy and lived in a fantasy where he thought the two were married. It's possible that this monster, a man that preyed on children in the most depraved ways, spent his working hours among them. In 2010, over 20 years after the original abductions and assaults, a new investigation was launched in finding out details and hopefully identify Mr. Cruel. Task Force Apollo was launched, hoping that newer technology and investigative methods could bring about an answer that prior detectives failed to find. Unfortunately, much to the dismay of the task force itself, many of the case files were misfiled, unorganized, or just straight up missing.
This is not the first time we've heard about Australian police.
This is not the first time we've heard about police, period.
Yeah.
Misfiling, missing evidence, things like that. In fact, one of the vital pieces of evidence that could have led to Mr. Cruel's doorstep, a piece of tape used to bind one of the victims, was one of the pieces of evidence that was missing.
Huh.
Police could have potentially used that piece of tape to recover DNA from Mr. Cruel, but it disappeared while in police custody. This missing piece of crucial evidence, paired with Mr. Cruel's tactical abilities and his knowledge of forensics evidence, has led many to theorize that he might have been involved in law enforcement.
Could have been a cop.
Could have been.
And the reason the evidence got misfiled is because he did it.
Yeah. It's possible that he would know what investigators would be looking for, which is why he did his best to cleanse his victims of any DNA and remove vital evidence afterwards. We can only guess whether it was corruption or ineptitude that led to these essential parts of the case gone missing. However, one suspect was detained in 2013 that ultimately could have been Mr. Cruel. Robert Keith Knight was a man who made a living as a youth worker and school volunteer, but had been arrested on two separate occasions for a variety of crimes against children. In 1980 and 1996, Knight had been arrested and convicted for sexual assaults on minors, and a multitude of other victims had come out of the woodwork following his convictions.
Huh.
According to the original Operation Spectrum investigators, Robert Keith Knight was one of their suspects that had never quite panned out, but investigators had been unable to eliminate him from contention. He remained a person of interest throughout the following investigations, and the time of Mr. Cruel would coincide with his post-1980 conviction release. After being released from prison for his 1996 conviction in 2009, Knight began to amass thousands of child pornography images, and he was later detained in investigation by Victorian police. He pled guilty to the overwhelming evidence, and while awaiting trial, he leaped from a second-story prison railing to his death by suicide. So he's just one of the many suspects that Victorian police have had to this day, and they have refused to make much more information to the public. More recently, many people have begun to theorize that Mr. Cruel himself might have resurfaced and been involved in the 2011 abduction of 13-year-old schoolgirl Bung Siri Boone, as that case remains unsolved without an end in sight. But as of this moment, the Mr. Cruel case is still open, and he remains one of Australia's most wanted criminals. And that's the story of Mr. Cruel.
Well, thank you for that. That's a noodle twister.
Yeah, it always is when they have these decades-old cases that remain unsolved. And I'd like to say with DNA technology, maybe we'd get some closure to this, but got stuff missing that could have helped. So don't know if this one will ever be solved. Don't know. Don't know. One of the cases that we did cover, the Abigail German and oh gosh, I forget the other girl's name, but it was the murder on the High Bridge.
Yes.
They actually have someone in custody for that now.
What?
Yeah, yeah,
Nice.
they have someone in custody for that. They'll be going on trial. I kind of keep up with that and follow along with that. If you remember the Chad and Lori Daybell murders that we covered,
Yeah.
Lori Daybell did get convicted. Chad Daybell, his trial is still ongoing. So I do follow along with some of these as we go and try to see if there's any updates. And I'll let you know here as we get them.
Sweet. Thank you, sir.
So awesome. Thank you again for joining us for yet another week of Nerdery and Murdery. We appreciate each and every one of you. As always, you can find more information on our website, nerderymurdery.com. You can find links to this episode as well as pictures, and also links to our videos, which Ziggy so cleverly does constantly.
Why? Yes. Why? Thank you. I like to put our videos out there. There's a playlist for every episode. Plus, this will be in the episode when it airs as well. And we also do some TikToks all the time.
Awesome. Awesome. Very much appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
On our webpage, you can also find the link to our merchandise, where if you wish to show off your Nerdery Murdery fandom, please do consider purchasing some merchandise off there. It does help with the show. Along with the link to our Patreon, where if you wish to become a patron of the show and also help donate to the show, help keep us going, because the costs do go to the production to keep this show going and on the air. It does not go to our luxurious homes, Lamborghinis, and fabulous vacations that we don't take.
That's right.
And last but not least, please don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It helps us, helps others find the show that may be looking for content that we're putting out there. So with that,
I have been Zig with your nerdery.
and I'm Geoffrey with your murdery.
Cue the music.